She's a former BBC News correspondent and the founder of One Perfect Pitch, a consulting firm in San Francisco. She works with business executives and entrepreneurs to shape the story and deliver their pitches. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, and her clients include people like Deloitte, LinkedIn, Adobe, KPMG, and many others. She was born in South Korea, grew up in Normandy, and has lived in numerous countries around the world. You can follow her on LinkedIn or Twitter, or I assume a variety of social media, which she will talk about. Her book, The Art of Making One Perfect Pitch, is available at McGraw-Hill and available on Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble. And we'll be having a book signing after the talk today. So here with her talk, How to Pitch Your Idea in a Minute, Marie.
Hi, everyone. Who's French here? Oh, congrats. Because I was asked if I knew all the French people here working at VMware. So first, I'd like to start thanking Dana, thanking Fanny and Mike for organizing this tech talk. I'm really happy to be here. Today, so we have three half hours. So the first half hour, I will be speaking about storytelling, presenting the book, and then I'll dive into giving feedback on a few elevator pitches I found on the internet. And then I will take a few questions from you. So please prepare your questions. And then I'll do a book signing at 11 a.m. All right. So I'd like to start with explaining what it means to write a book. Anybody has ever written a book here, or white paper, did a PhD? Have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you know the pain, right? Writing a book. It took me 2 years to write the book from the moment McGraw-Hill approached me and pitched the book project to me. Of course, I said yes, because we're in Silicon Valley, so you're supposed to say yes. And as I used to be a journalist, you know that down the road, you're going to be writing a book. And this book, it took me 2 years, but it's based on my 13 years experience, first being a journalist, then working with startups in Silicon Valley and large corporations. So what does it mean, writing a book? It means that you have to sit for many hours, and it's not because you're sitting that the ideas are coming through your mind. I've tried different methods. I've, of course, procrastinated. I rented an apartment in Paris to write and be in a quiet environment. I tried writing for a half hour and then making a break for a half hour, but it goes too fast. I read many books on why we write from very renowned authors that I recommend. Why We Write, Steven Spielberg, very interesting, very inspiring. You also get to discover that many writers actually used to smoke a lot of opium or drink. I didn't get there, but I thought about it. So it was a long process. And how I came up with the manuscript, so it was really, how can I find a very simple framework, not talking about myself, not making it too complicated, but for you so that at the end of the book, or along with the book with the exercises or the examples, you can really get your pitch. You can really practice and then get an idea and get some inspiration. There are 5 chapters. The first chapter talks about storytelling, why storytelling is important in how you're presenting yourself, how you're selling yourself, trying to talk about your products, but also getting the emotional part so that your audience remembers what you're selling. The second chapter is about how do you find your story? What is the entire framework, okay? The hook, the structure, we'll talk about that later. The third chapter is how do you optimize your story? And you optimize your story through the pitch, because the pitch is only a snapshot of your entire story. And then 4th and 5th chapter, so what do you need to know before writing your pitch on your computer or taking a sheet of paper? And the last chapter is about what you need to know before stepping into the board meeting room or stepping into the amphitheater, what you need to know in terms of where do you sit, what do you wear, your body language. But the most important thing is how do you get down to the story. So I let you, if you think about writing a book one day, you can ask me. So that was the process. I want to talk now about how I got into storytelling. I got into storytelling because when you're a young child in Normandy, that's where I grew up. I was born in South Korea, and I was adopted to French parents when I was a year and a half. And I grew up in Normandy, and when you're in Normandy, you grew up with many tales, from the Viking, from the conquest of Normans, fighting. You're going to visit the Tapestry of Bayeux. Anyone has ever visited? It's a beautiful piece of work, depicting 11th century stories of conquest. So you grew up with that, and then for me, it was very important to not only read many more fairy tales, but also discovering the settings of those stories. That's what led me to journalism, because I wanted to travel. My first assignment was working for the French radio in Brussels, in Belgium, because I wanted to be at the center of the action, where all the decisions are being taken in Brussels. Then I wanted to go further, and I thought that it would be very interesting to go to Asia, because in 2004, right after the tsunami, there was a lot of interest around call centers in Bangalore. So going to India was obviously a right direction. So I settled there for 2 years, working for the French International Radio, and I got to cover many stories covering the middle class, but also earthquakes and bomb blasts, and trying to get the interest of people who are maybe brushing their teeth or stuck in the commute. Then what do you do when you're in India after 2 years? It's China. So I went to China. I lived there for 2 years, working for the BBC. Same stories in sense of everybody was looking at that country. So how do you find the stories that will generate and trigger interest from an audience who doesn't know anything about China? And that led me in 2008. 2008, everyone was looking at the US because of the presidential elections. I arrived here a few days prior to the elections that I covered for the media. And what struck me is that President Obama was using a lot of storytelling to communicate. And coming from China, where in a few cases you have to use VPN to get access to the information, here what I discovered is that many companies were actually becoming their own media. They were able to directly communicate with their audience. So it's not that you don't need to go through the media to communicate, but you as a company, you have the power to tell your own stories to your users, to engage your audience. And I thought that was very, very powerful. So, I did some videos working for companies, LinkedIn, Schneider Electric, to a point where I realized that it's not the medium that matters, it's really the message. It's really the pitch. What is the story you're telling? Because maybe you have only a few minutes, maybe you have 10 seconds, 40 seconds to get your message across. And that's got me into startups and becoming a mentor at 500 startups and other early stage incubators. And then many stories later, I'm here today to talk about how storytelling can be useful for you to get buy-in from your audiences. Okay, so is storytelling an art or a science? I didn't know that before starting writing the book, but there's a research that was done by researchers from Claremont University. And they found out that when you're telling stories to people, after a while, so there was a story of a dad. They told a story about a dad, losing his son, and then they realized that if the subjects were to hear and listen to that story, they were more inclined to give money to a cause that was related to the illness of his son. So it means that in that research, they found out that when you hear a story, it creates it increases the deliverance of this hormone called oxytocin. So whenever you're telling a story, it means that if people listen to that, it increases the deliverance of this hormone, and then people are more inclined to perform what you want them to do. There's another story that's very interesting that proves that storytelling works. It's a study made by 2 journalists from the New York Times. So what they did is that they got stuff from items and objects, insignificant objects from the thrift store, and they sold them on eBay. But what they did is that on eBay, they matched the story, so they asked famous writers to write a very nice story about those objects. So let's say a ceramic cat, a brush, something that they bought maybe for just a few cents. And they've realized that by telling a very nice, well-thought and well-written story, the subjects, they would sell for many more than they were actually bought. So whenever you in your work, you're trying to convince people, if you're using the power of storytelling, it means that it can be very effective. So what is storytelling, by the way? Storytelling, it's your capacity, it's your capability to convince an audience talking to their emotional part. So there's a structure, and structure sets you free, and we'll talk about that later. Storytelling is a way to convince your audience that it's not only about numbers, it's not only about facts. There's something that you can do together that will speak to their heart. And what I found out writing this book is that storytelling is universal. Who was not born in America here, in the United States? More than, almost 80% of the room. The first story of Cinderella was found in China in the 5th century. You all know Cinderella's story. It starts with the death of the mom, and then, you have the struggle, and she has to make choices. And in our work, it's the same, When you're building a product, there are so many struggles because you have the prototype, because you don't get the approval of your management, because you don't get the buy-in from your teams. There are so many problems. But we want to know about those problems because that's why it makes your story interesting. If you're only talking about the rosy side of your story, nobody is going to believe you. I always take this example of, you're asking your friends, over the weekend, what's up? What did you do? And they say nothing. Doesn't make it interesting, but if they say, we moved and we run into those problems, yes, now because you doing this projection on their story, because you felt you lived that before, yes, you're vouching for the hero. That's why it's working very well. And storytelling is universal because the structure is being used in so many countries, and you have Cinderellas, they have different colors. They were found in China in 5th century, but they're also being told and retold they will be retold for many years to come. All right. So I'd like to talk about the recurrent mistakes technology professionals and others are making when they're pitching. I've been working with more than 500 professionals past years, coming from more than 50 countries. And I can tell you, if you're coming from Jordania, from Turkey, from Chile, from China, from Europe, you're making exactly the same mistakes when you're pitching. So first one, most people think that because they want to explain clearly what they do, they need to give as much information as possible. But it's not because you're giving so much information that your message will be clearer. You have to make a choice, and that's the problem. Let's say you have a team, maybe you're running a team of 500 people, and you want to give an update to your management. You cannot tell the story of each of these 500 people. You have to pick maybe one or two, and that's why it makes it more clear at the end when you want to tell a story about that. You have to make a choice. So don't overwhelm your audience with too much data, too much information, because your message will get diluted. The second mistake I've seen, the recurrent mistake people are making, is not giving enough context. Sometimes, they would tend to, jumpstart and dive directly into the features, or even talking about, new product launch. But then, imagine that the person you're talking to, maybe, they've had five meetings prior to your meeting, back to back, or they have a work situation, or they're hungry. They're thinking about, other problems. So that's why if you try to give them context about why are we doing that right now, is there a momentum, what does it mean for your team, for my team? It helps them ground and prepare the conversation so that your pitch gets across. Does that resonate with any of you here? Yeah, see people nodding, so it's good. And the third recurrent mistake that you're doing when you're pitching is the lack of precision when you're speaking. And I know that's something that many engineers ask me. Okay, but we need to give data, we need to give facts. Yes, you can, and it's possible to do it when you're speaking as well. But using words like groundbreaking, revolutionary, it doesn't paint images in the mind of people. It doesn't mean anything. It's too high level, and we don't see what you mean. So those three mistakes, it's really what you have to pay attention to. And I invite you to pay attention to that next time you're listening to a speaker. Okay. So how do you optimize your story? I really insist, you have many stories, you have a long story, but the pitch is a choice that you're making of taking that picture at a moment of your life. If you're giving the entire story, you don't need to sit for hours in front of the fireplace. Just, a minute, 5 minutes, you can give us that, and it's enough. It's a matter of choice. The second important point is that when you're pitching, think that maybe your management, your boss, your team members, they need to be able to pitch your pitch to others. So if you don't make it simple for them to understand, and it's not because sometimes, okay, they're asking questions, maybe you feel they're aggressive or they're asking questions they shouldn't be asking. But you have to make it easy for them. You have to give them the right elements so that they can pitch for you and so that they can be your best ambassadors or your best advocates. And that's very, very important. And last thing, a pitch evolves over time. It's always different depending on your audience. Dexter was asking me if, he asked me, okay, Marie, you must be giving lots of talks. So yes, but each time I give a talk, talking about my book, each time my talk is different. If I'm speaking to an audience of women's entrepreneur, or if I'm, I was speaking at Adobe, what I've noticed at Adobe, most of the employees, they not know very well how to pitch their company. So I started like this. Women engineers, what is, usually the recurrent theme is the lack of confidence. Okay, so you start like this. So the hook needs to be tailored to your audience. Your pitch needs to be tailored and starts with the hook. What I've seen running workshops and training with teams, that before pitching, people usually think that they will field the questions and then pitch, and because it's a conversation, they will readjust. No. Your pitch needs to be rehearsed and practiced because there's some sense, of the room, and it needs, because you don't have time, because they don't have time, because they're busy and you're fighting for attention. That's why your pitch needs to be prepared. And your pitch needs to be perfect just once. We don't really care if you pitch other team members or your new boss or your last boss before. You need to pitch that person, and your pitch needs to be perfect for that person at that moment. Okay. So we talked about storytelling, we talked about pitching. How about the structure? I told before that structure sets you free. And I will share those slides, don't worry. So structure sets you free. In the second chapter of my book, I came up with this framework. There are 3 different ways for me how you can start your story. And it starts with the strong hook. Why do I insist on the hook? It's because you only have a few seconds to convince your audience that they can listen to you for the next hour or for the next 5 minutes. Don't lose yourself in, using filling words, or just go straight to the point. There are 3 ways to start, with a strong hook. What is the problem that you're resolving for the other team, for your client, for your management? What's the problem? Don't start, right away pushing all the features or the updates. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the person. What helps is asking them questions, not diving too much into the conversation right away. Another way to start a hook is breaking news. We all like to know what's going on, with you guys. Oh, okay. So here's the latest update, on our product, what's new, what's fresh. We all like to know the novelty aspect of it. It's a great way to start a pitch. The last way that I found very effective to start a pitch is the momentum. You know, did your team buy another product, another team? You know, what's going on that will support, you know, your pitch? What's the momentum here? And then when you want to continue, once you're done with your hook, you know, you're showing, you know, either the problem you're resolving, you're doing the demonstration, and then you can dive into more technical details. And what I've seen is missing when somebody's pitching is that at the end, they leave their audience with no call to action. They don't ask them to do anything for them. But if you don't ask them something very precise, you leave them in a state of anxiety. So what can you ask? Okay, a meeting with somebody else, some feedback on the product, another meeting, but try to make it very clear that at the end of your pitch, my presentations. So what's next for you? Practice your pitch, read the book, do the exercises. I think we're a bit short on time to take more questions. Anybody had maybe 2 questions or 3 questions in a row? 3 questions in a row and we'll finish the session. Yes, one?
Are there any specific exercises that you can suggest for people who are introverts? I know you mentioned about the need to move around and create energy, but specifically in terms of the people who tend to speak softly or, you know, are not as animated as they need to be to convey high energy, what are some of the things that you can recommend?
Okay. Second question? Yes.
So one of my favorite TED Talks is the TED Talk about power poses and how
Yes.
it can help boost your confidence before public speaking.
Yes.
So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that and if you have any best practices.
Okay. Okay. And third question? Yes.
Thanks for the great speech. It's really helpful. So what I want to ask is, in a rare situation, you could forget your content, your next point. So how do you handle those situations? Thank you.
Loss of memory, you mean? Okay. Okay. All right. So specific exercises. Besides the, you know, joining groups, Toastmasters, or any networking group where at the beginning of the session you have to stand up and talk about yourself, what you can do is you take a sheet of paper and you write your pitch. And if you work on your pitch, you have, you know, other team members, your colleagues, your friends look at your pitch. Maybe it could be you take Word, you write Arial 12 fonts, maybe just a minute, and you have people look at it, and then you keep repeating and you write it to the end that you will know that you own it. And this will give you the confidence. So that could be one first exercise. Another great way to, if you think you are an introvert, and people usually are the worst judges of themselves, maybe you're not so much an introvert, what you can do is, you know, joining classes that are not necessarily related to public speaking, but whenever you have, you know, to stand up. It can be improv. Improv is great because you are in the moment and you have lots of adrenaline and you just need to react. And if you do that over a year, it could help you to overcome that fear. But I would say, you know, if you're an introvert, you will be an introvert your entire life. And how can you turn that into an asset, you know? Maybe you don't want to expose yourself in rooms where you have 250, 100 people. Maybe you're more comfortable talking in a room where you have maybe 2 or 3 people, so just do it. And avoid situations where you have to speak in larger rooms. Okay, second question, power poses. So I come from content, and to me, a great public speaker with a very authoritative body language, very comfortable, it won't make up for a good story or great content. It will help, it will support, the delivery always helps, but if you're able to articulate what you say, and even if you need notes, you know, if you need to read, that's very fine, because what is the goal here? The goal is to convey a message. So If you need notes, if you need to read something to make it clear for your audience, and if you're sweating or if you're shaking, if you prefer, to stand behind your desk, you can do that. But then maybe every 6 months, having a goal. Okay, so next time I'm speaking, I can just, stand behind my podium, because, if you're hiding behind your podium, you're creating a distance between you and your audience. But if you're standing here and just holding, it helps you anchor yourself. So, gradually moving towards more comfort. But I would say first, it's important to fix your story before the body language. And the third question about memory loss. It comes down to practice again. What you can do is, again, the Post-it, I'm not, I think it's 3M. I'm not working for 3M, the company. But you can have, if you're driving, so let's say you have 12 slides. So you have 12 Post-its, and they all start with the first sentence of each slide. So it gives you, a jump start for your presentation. And then if you practice it, at least 20 times, 50 times, it will help. Another thing that helps is we have the space, the geography memory. You've heard about Dreamforce. So all the keynote speakers, they come in and they rehearse, and they know how many steps they have to do before changing the next slide and starting a new sentence. It comes down to that. So when you have a presentation, maybe a few days before, you can come into the room, and then because you know that you have your 12 Post-its, you know that after the third Post-it, you're going to be next to that plant. And then it's going to be time to move here in the middle, because you need to take some space to project energy. And then maybe, fourth, fifth Post-it, you're here, next to the other plant. And your space will help you memorize your talk. But once again, it's not about yourself. It's about the audience. What do you give them so that they can pitch for you to others? And I will finish my presentation today. Congratulations to those who came early and got the book. I will book sign it on the outside. Please share it with your friends. Ask me if I do run storytelling workshops for companies, so ask me any information about that. Thank you very much for all your questions. I was very excited to be here today. Have a great day.